So, thanks for having the patience to wait for the arrangement. Now we have a panel. It's wide-ranging. You'll see that you'll have people from different backgrounds and different working with different subjects. So I would like for the panel members to introduce themselves in a while. The setup is that we can have some, I have prepared some questions, we can discuss, everyone from the panel that wants to discuss them can have these discussion points. We can have some questions also from you on the same discussion points. There are about 3 or 4 topics that we would like to discuss. So first of all, you have already here Arjen talking, so by now you are familiar with what he is working on. So now, Vasilis, I would like to better introduce yourself. It's better to do it as person.
Thanks again for the invitation. My name is Vasilis Vlachos. I'm a lecturer at the Technological Educational Institute Day2 of Thessaly, and I'm also here as a member of the Greek Free and Open Source Software Society. And of course, there's an excellent presentation from Arjen. I have some points to make, but I think that will come later. So.
Hi, I'm Aral Balkan. I run a small social enterprise called Indie. Can we do something about this, the audio? Okay. And I gave a talk yesterday as well. And I just want to, before we start off, say that in Arjen's talk as well, you saw that we have a challenge in free and open source to make it accessible to a large audience, to a regular audience, a diverse audience of regular people. And one of the ways that we're not going to do that is if our community is entirely comprised of young to middle-aged white men. And looking at the panel here today, I feel very uncomfortable by the fact that we are again a panel of young to middle-aged white men talking to you about how we're going to fix society. So I know for a fact that there is at least one qualified person here who's not a middle-aged white man who is building exactly the same sort of solutions that we're building. And I believe that this panel will benefit more from her voice and the diversity that will bring to the panel than mine. So Georgia, if you would be so kind to take my place, would that be all right? Thank you.
I don't think that you have to take.
No, it's all right. It's a small panel anyway.
No.
I just came here today to pick up my keys when I got stuck, but I'm gladly going to join this panel.
So you can also introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, I'm Georgia Kondesidou. I'm leading Project Momentum. We are trying to build an app that will enable people to share, cherish, and preserve their truly important moments for years to come. We're building an application that will be both on mobile and on desktop. I presented it yesterday. If you have any questions, you can ask.
And now we have our last panel member. He was very kind to join us today, even though it's very difficult for him. Well, Alexandros will bring also a different and more diverse perspective, because we are from the free software movement, let's say, we'll all agree. But Alexandros is an outsider, and please tell us about yourself.
Hello, I'm Alexandros Roustas, and I actually run a local angel fund / business incubator who invests in the IT sector and is funded by a pretty large Greek corporate called Quest Holdings.
Well, Alexandros is the manager of IT-ability, you know about that. And our first question, our first discussion point that I would like to discuss is it would be a naive question, but I think that we are not at a point in time where people are really understand what privacy means, if privacy is important, and what are the different levels for privacy. We need different tools for journalists, different tools for our everyday communications, maybe. So the first question, the first discussion point is whether you think that citizens are educated enough, how citizens can be educated more into issues of privacy, and how can someone outreach them. And probably the key point that we should answer is, okay, how we tell with an easy way that privacy is something very important and it's actually a human right. How can we achieve to tell that and make it clear? So anyone that would like to start with that?
Well, I can say a few things. I think technology education shouldn't actively push people, in the wrong direction. So in the Netherlands, we now have what is called iPad schools. So this is a primary education from age 4 to age 12, where the entire educational process is designed around the iPad, and the school is literally named an iPad school. So that, I think, pushes children from an early age on to be nice corporatist consumers, which is wrong. We don't have to teach everybody all the technical details. I think the most important thing that is lacking in modern education is that actually it teaches young children to become adult citizens who actively want human rights such as privacy. I live in Berlin, where the privacy discussion is a little bit different politically than in most other Western European countries. And there you see that we do 4 or 5 evenings per week, almost every day. We have these informal sessions called crypto parties, where anybody who wants can just show up with a laptop and you will be taught how to do personal digital security. So in Berlin you have literally like 5 a week. In a country like the Netherlands you might have 1 a month. And it has nothing to do with the technology, it has also to do with the cultural different approach to privacy. Where generally most of citizens don't seem to think that privacy is a very important thing. Whereas most German citizens think it's a pretty important thing. So this is entirely a cultural phenomenon. So I strongly believe that if you teach young children to be grown-up citizens who will demand the right to privacy, that then, the demand for getting the technology education that comes with that will pretty much automatically follow. But right now our cultural education and explanation of what privacy is and why it is an important human right that underpins most of the other important human rights in a modern society is pretty much completely lacking. So most people barely know what privacy is or why it's important. But yeah, go to Berlin, you can go to any cafe, strike up a conversation, and people will explain to you that privacy is the thing you need to fight your government when everything else has already gone to shit. That's what it's for. And also it's nice if you can have some weird porn habits that nobody else has to know about. That's nice, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that privacy is a last line of defense if everything else is already broken. And the Germans know this better than pretty much anyone, so we can learn a little lesson there.
So, in the Greek free and open source software society, we have already established a working group which is aims towards security and privacy. A good friend of mine, Panagiotis Krantiot, is a great advocate of PGP, and we're already planning to organize some e-signing parties, and we're pushing really hard. So the public sector as well will adapt this kind of initiatives in order to protect the communications between public sector and citizens. And I think we already made some points there. Personally, my colleagues have 2 courses. The one is about security, and we're trying to teach the students how to hack into systems in order to understand that it's very, very easy to obtain information from third parties if they are not well protected. It's something that everyone can do with basic to little knowledge about computer security. And also we have a course about legal issues of information communication technologies. And of course we tackle issues about privacy. Very extensive there, so what is the basic rights of the user, how can protect their data, what are the rights they have, who can handle their data and what way. So there's some things that we're already trying to do, but of course there's a long way in order to reach satisfactory levels about these issues. But I think that the basic thing is to adapt some very well-known best practices, just like PGP for our online communication. That's the number one.
And I think I also agree with Arian that education is the best way, really, to, if you want to create a conscience on an issue, then education is the way to go. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that in a coordinated level. Like, as you mentioned, there are different cultures, there's different level of conscience about privacy. So it's difficult to say that there is one solution that fits all, but another way to go around it is to create alternatives. And that's what we're trying to do, to create alternatives that will not make people choose between convenience and privacy, because this is, and we raised that point yesterday. Okay, so we even if we learn about privacy, are we willing to give up the convenience that we now have with the existing solutions for it? And some people, surprisingly, a lot of people will answer no. Because it's easy. It's easy to use Facebook and Google, it's easy. It's very easy, it's free, it's working great. So why change? Even if I know my rights, a person would say, I know my rights, I know that privacy is a human right, but I'm willing to give it up. Because that's the society, that's the system, really, that we live in. So it is important to give alternatives that just create delightful experiences and that put away this dilemma of privacy versus convenience.
Yeah, I would say that from a practical perspective, I agree a lot with that, because I see that customers, users, the general public want a peace of mind, want technology to be there, but they want to use technology without actually knowing that it's there. So yeah, for sure, the culture that we should raise is that privacy is very important, and this is a very key thing. However, I see that people do need peace of mind, and if they don't have that, sometimes they're not willing to use technology at all. So I'm familiar with the iPad project in schools. It actually runs in Greece the last 2 or 3 years with some private schools, and it's been very successful. It runs in 20 schools in Greece. They don't call them iPad schools, but they use one-to-one iPad. So before that, they didn't use technology at all in schools. So they used to have a Microsoft computer in some labs, but they didn't actually use it. Whereas with the iPad, they use technology every day in the classroom, every hour in the classroom. Why? Because Apple has managed to create a very user-friendly, educational also friendly experience. They work a lot on the user experience, user interface, and all that stuff, and they manage to make it very friendly. So, I mean, we have to address this somehow. And that's why I agree a lot with you. If it is, to expand this open source community, we have to find ways that, we have to find ways that it's very familiar to the users and very easy to be used by the general public. And I think that if we don't do that, this will just never going to happen.
Yeah. And if I may add, if the existing solutions are that good, we need to be that good in order to take people with us to gain audience.
So I want to guard against, again, also from our technology community, reducing most of our fellow citizens to mere consumers of technology that we provide. So I agree that there's a lot of technically great free software out there that can really use some usability work, to put it mildly. I completely agree with that. But I also think that if we just say to people the only way that we can get our fellow citizens to, use some of the basic values of democracy in a free society is by making this stuff more sexy than Apple, because we will never be able to convince them that actually, being free isn't free, it comes with a little bit of cost and effort, then I think we're going to have a very hard time. So if we are going to go head to head with Apple and Google on their home turf, that's going to be a very, very hard battle. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I'm saying that we should also, through education and just public discussions and maybe, I don't know, political leadership, call it what you want, also really get people to want privacy maybe more than a shiny piece of aluminium that is a CIA spying device.
I've got a question. Here we go. I've got a question, and Arya, this kind of goes back to your talk as well, which was interesting because it's something that I keep hearing about. For one thing, we keep putting Apple into the same basket as Google, Facebook, etc. Now, I completely concede that they're a closed and proprietary company, and there is a whole lot that's terrible with them. And believe me, I don't like being in the position of defending the largest company in the world by market capitalization. But we also have to understand that their business model is fundamentally different to the business model of Google, Facebook, etc. They still make their money by selling products to people, primarily, instead of selling people, which is what Facebook and Google do. Can they spy on everyone? Of course they can. They're closed. We don't even know if they're doing it, right? But it is an absolute competitive advantage, privacy, for Apple. It's something that Google and Facebook cannot compete on at all, because it's against their fundamental business model. So I think it's really important that we separate that, because when we're thinking about how we're going to solve this problem, there's one thing that says, okay, stop using everything that exists and start using our open source and free software, etc. But there's another tactic that we can employ, which is to wean people off of the existing platforms. And if there's one platform that we can start on, which is what we're doing, it is Apple's platforms, because we have a regular audience, which by supporting that platform, we're not entirely giving up in terms of like if we're supporting something like Android or Google with their business model. So what we're trying to do, for example, is wean people off of the Apple platform onto a platform that we can then run on any open and free platform. But I think the key thing that we miss, and this is where my question is coming up, that I'd love to hear you guys talk about, is it's not about shiny devices. It's not about the beautiful devices that Apple gives. It's about respecting it's about respecting people's experiences as well. So I think one of the arrogances that we have in the free and open source world is saying, look, even if your experience today is not great, live with it, learn it, because it protects your freedoms. And I think that's something that we can't continue to do. Not about shiny things, but respecting the human experience. Because if you think about it, experiences are all we have in life. There's strings of experiences. And we can't say, forgo the immediate experience, what you're feeling, your delight, the current moment, or how easy it is or how convenient it is, because of a future benefit. Just like with Google and Facebook, they say, forgo the future benefits, right? Because of the immediate experience we're giving you. We have to design the whole term. And I'd love to hear you guys talk about that.
Also, I would like to expand somehow the conversation on that. So, take it as a second question is whether you think that by using service or not having actually reliable alternative services like Facebook or Twitter or something else like that on the consumer space, our users get spoiled and our citizens actually get used to the idea that your data can be collected, can be processed, can be everything that all these organizations do. And so if also government has a copy, it's not such a big deal if you're not a target. So from the one hand is the user experience perspective, and the other hand is that probably even using services, consumer services that are actually not respecting your privacy might open up ways for government intrusion and for government interfering to your privacy.
So I think when it comes to sort of having the big discussion in society about these kinds of discussions, I always compare things like Facebook to asbestos. which, you know, we used to build everything out of in the Western world for a long time, because it's very convenient, you know, it's fireproof and vibration-proof, and it's cheap and strong, and it's really, asbestos is a wonderful building material, and so we used to build hospitals out of asbestos. True story. And then we discovered that asbestos has this long-term significant disadvantage, which, by the way, has nothing to do with building engineering, but has all to do with people getting cancer. And so we stopped using asbestos, and now asbestos is, you know, only used by trained professionals wearing special protective clothing in industrial settings, and it's tightly regulated, and so it should be. And oh, by the way, the entire building industry lobbied like crazy for the rights to keep building hospitals and daycare centers out of asbestos, because that was what they did, and that's how they make their money. And so we changed it, and it was a long, painful process. And so, but we did manage to change this big institutional, powerful commercial sector for this non-technically relevant but big social benefit that is very far away, because it takes decades to get from, you know, inhaling a couple of asbestos fibers to getting cancer. So there's like a 20-year gap. But still, we managed to do it eventually. It took us a while, by the way. You know, it took us like 3 decades to do it. But I really think those are, you know, and that might not be fun to some companies, but I do think we need to find, you know, intelligent and maybe even fun or funny, attractive ways to discuss these things in those kinds of terms. So again, I completely agree that, you know, you can't just have people go cold turkey on all the technology they're used to. So it is a process to get off stuff, and you can start with little steps and take another little step and take another little step. The most important thing I always try to teach people at the end of one day's training is to have them realize how far they've come in a single day. So you take people to a one-day, you know, basic security training for non-technical people. And in the morning you say, okay, you know, this looks all maybe quite mysterious to you. And by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, look, see, now you understand all of this. See, it's not so hard. You don't have to be a computer science professional to understand this. And to be empowered by the experience of actually learning this stuff in a single day. Imagine how far you could go if you would spend another day and another day. Now, again, maybe that's not for everybody, but in my experience, a lot of people will feel very empowered by the fact that actually that they experience that this technology is not mysterious, but it is something that you can master and understand and be the master of, instead of it being the master of you.
Anyone else from the panel would like to comment? Okay. So probably now we can take a couple of questions on this issue, and then I will do another couple of questions.
Hi, good morning to everyone. My name is Chris, and well, since I started getting involved with computers and information technology, which I actually study now, I've been looking at things throughout the model defender-offender. I started actually with I wanted to understand how the models behind attacks work. So I found out that our greatest problem is the human factor. So shouldn't we just start thinking of how we could make people understand why are they, let's say, victims, and try to make them a bit more aware of what they share online, of what they're doing wrong online, instead of just start giving them some other options. I mean, we don't have to transit from Facebook to something other immediately, which would be nice, to be honest, but okay. But let's start with training people how to use Facebook in a bit more secure way, because everyone nowadays is, or large businesses at least, are taking advantage of social engineering. And that's something I found out using a program doing that.
Okay. Thanks. Can we take 2 questions at the same time in order to...
First of all, I would like to thank you that you develop solutions and they are available to all of us, those who do. And we have an experience in the Tertiary Education Institute of Thessaly, and this is generally in the Greek universities network, that we use, let's say, the Caroline system, E-classes we call it. We do a lot of open work with it, and it's wonderful. And then we can get somehow to use your experience and copy and adapt what you're doing. We would love to do that. And if you can identify what is important and how it can be used, like the Munich example for the public sector, and we can persuade whatever government, local government can do that, that would be wonderful. And lastly, asbestos is a Greek word. It's being used wrongly. It's amiantos, the one that's doing the wrong thing. Asbestos is something that is very, very good in Greek language. So we use that to paint the walls. And the English, when they took this word, the amiantos, they translated it wrongly. Okay, thank you. So we would love to hear those solutions.
I don't know if someone from the panel would like to comment on these two questions regarding education, open source solution for government and organizations, but also the other question that, if I can summarize correctly, is whether probably users should be educating how to using the existing system. So we might not need alternatives, but we might need better education.
Okay, first question. I don't think it's a linear thing, like we need to do something first and then do something next. I think it's more of a war on different fronts, and it's not a war, okay, but it's an effort on different fronts, I think, and I'm not sure if there is a linearity in the solution. I think, of course, it's very important to educate people, to find clever ways to show, like yesterday we saw some artists doing some hip-hop thingy with informing people about privacy and what Facebook is doing, and Facebook being evil. And that was fun. That's a very nice way of passing a message. So you need that, and you need education, but at the same time, you need to create alternatives as well. So it's not either or this, we do this first, then. It's an effort that needs to be ongoing from different perspectives, from different people. And it's not just technologists that are going to solve it, it's not just journalists, it's not just government, it's an effort that goes through every layer.
Wouldn't it be more effective if we started educating people first, so that they would actually appreciate that what you, for example, are going to give them? Next.
It would be easy, but it's a very simplistic way of thinking, because it also implies that everyone is on the same level of knowledge about things. We're living in a developed world. But not everyone is on the same page, right? And there are people that just now are learning, like in Greece, for example, because I've lived in Sweden and in Greece. In Sweden, the average user is much more experienced. They know about privacy because they've reached this level of knowing their platforms, and now they're thinking about other stuff. They have this luxury of thinking. In Greece, we just now, like recently, started using all these platforms, so we're really newbies in this kind of issues, and we're not thinking that maturely. So, yeah, just saying that we need to educate them first, yes, but it's not, it doesn't apply for everyone on the same level. That's what I think.
I think that both Vasilis and Arjen have some comments to make.
You're absolutely right. May I add something to this? So, for example, in our college, we identified a number of possible threats. For example, most of the services, including the one that can register the grades for the students were without encryption. So we made some points with my good colleague George Planas about these problems, and still yet no one have taken some measures in order to correct some of these problems, but still have problems with SSL. We haven't deployed in every service encryption, which is the absolute basic in order to avoid the most basic of attacks. But no one is bothered about that. As long as the service is up and running, everything is fine. So in that case, most of my colleagues are also very sympathetic to move to closed platforms like Microsoft or Gmail or other solutions. So what I'm trying to say is that security and privacy don't come from free. You have to invest, and of course the open source solution is the only way to be as sure as possible that everything is going to be fine. But you have to invest in that. You have to support these platforms. You have to set up and maintain these solutions in order to achieve security and privacy. Other way, the users get bad experience and they want to move to those platforms in a way or another.
Would you like to write?
So again, I see a role for education. I think is probably the biggest thing, but education can only happen if you also get government policy to be that education. So I know virtually nothing about the Greek policy situation, but I know that in the Netherlands, from age 4 to age 22, in 3 levels of schooling, people only get Microsoft. So they are literally in a Microsoft training camp from age 4 through to, including college level tertiary education. Even if you do computer science at just below full university level, this is all you see. Until you change that, it's going to be very hard to change everything else. And so that makes it really an uphill struggle. But at the same time, you should do all the other things as well. I agree, we should do all these things, and we should start 30 years ago. So there is some urgency to this whole situation, but yeah, it's not one thing. And education is probably at the heart of many of these solutions, but education also goes back to government policy. Right? If you have publicly funded schools and publicly determined curricula, then you need the policy as well as maybe helping individual teachers to start doing different things.
So I think that Elena has...
Arjen, you said previously that 100 billion euros Europe gives to the US for its technology. Software. Okay, I have a difficulty, to believe that, honestly, if someone goes to Jean-Claude Juncker and says, okay, you have a problem of unemployment, of blah, 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 why don't you save this money for European companies? If, let's say, you are working all in this sector, why you don't prepare a business plan? See exactly how many companies we need, European companies, to build the software, where it should be located, blah, 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 and hand it on honestly to the European Commission. I don't think it's very constructive if we see them as satans, all the governments. I mean, sometimes we don't concentrate, I think, on the solution. What do you think? Do you think that they are programmed not to want? Because there was a huge debate in the European Union about also the roaming. And there was a huge lobby in Brussels from the telecommunication companies because they were making a lot of profit. But the European Commission won, actually.
Yes.
And I think that if we really insist on this and someone goes and hands them a business plan, 100 billion euros, you give them to the United States, save them here. I think it's a first step. But I would like to contribute on this.
No. So I think that's a good idea. My experience is that even if you explain this in the very plain terms, I think I'm using for this, 100 billion euros, that's something everybody can understand.
You have measured it.
No, we know this from academic research into this from various universities going back to 2006, so we can actually track the numbers. And it just grows 9% per year independent of economic growth. So it's also completely unsustainable. As well as making us a digital colony and then all the other stuff. But it is quite remarkable to see how scared politicians are for these behemoth companies and for US political pressure. And so it's quite normal for a senior policymaker at ministerial level to sit across from a table to me after the Dutch Parliament has actually voted unanimously on an open source policy for the Dutch national government. And then I'm sent in and we're going to discuss how to do this. And so here's a senior advisor to a Dutch elected official. And he says, well, but you do understand that Microsoft is not going to like this. And so for them, it's completely natural to think in terms, how will a big powerful corporation respond to this? That apparently is a more important consideration than the fact that you just had a unanimous vote in Parliament. This is a natural way of thinking. I'm not sure sort of how that happened in the brains of these people, but it's a very deep sort of cultural problem where it is now in large parts of the Western world considered normal to have important national policy issues to be determined by corporations. So it is normal to say, at least in the places I've been, to say, well, we have to work with the market. And then I always ask, well, who the hell is the market? Unless you mean those multiply convicted economic criminals, but really, why are they into the policy side? But it is really quite normal. This is a very deep cultural thing. I'm not sure how to fix this, but we do need to fix it.
Well, I think that things are changing. Last week, I happened to be involved in some discussions about the new European project driven by the European Parliament, which is also the budget is very high, about the data centers and actually the data handling of the European Parliament. And having been involved in a Greek corporate that's in the consortium that has already won that project. And they are actually trying to find the open source solutions, okay? But the very big problem is that actually the American corporates, as you say, are really very competitive, not only in the lobbying level, but also at the technology level. And actually their models and the technology is very well proven. So for a big organization like the European Parliament, it takes a lot of time to actually rely on an open source solution. So what we're trying to do is to find ways of building solutions that will actually have two pillars. The legacy, let's say, pillar of this American technology and the open source pillar, and to find levels of software above this, monitoring, management, and all that stuff, that could actually interoperate with both pillars. So things are changing, and as far as I know, the European Union wants to throw a lot of money on that. But let's face it, the American companies are very competitive, they have a lot of talent, and they have very good products, and it will take time. European Union, perhaps you know better than I do because you're more of a technology guy, but I think that European Union has not yet reached the level of technology that the US has managed to reach. Or at least that's, yeah.
To spend some money also on basic security research, because most of the cryptographic algorithms are laws introduced by the NSA, as the recent Snowden files reveal. So we have to get back and provide really strong cryptographic algorithms that cannot be undermined by the NSA or other security agencies, as well as open software. Recently, the TrueCrypt software was audited and found that it has no hidden backdoors or other security states. That is important in order to, again, have trust to open source software and algorithms that we use right now, because I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, so I'd like to pop up for the next question, let's say. I think we're running kind of out of time, but we should discuss these two questions. The first question will be, where finally we see that all these corporations, all these organizations collect, process, etc., data with a non-transparent way, with a way that the user is not really aware of. So the first question is, do you think that eventually the solution can only come through some kind of regulation? Laws, things that state can impose. And do you think that the problem with be amended by this regulation. What is your view on that?
I think regulation can certainly be a part of it. You know, in the same way, an individual that was concerned about asbestos could never have solved that problem. You know, some of these problems are so big and sort of infrastructural that you need your government, which is hopefully your government and not Microsoft's government, to help you to defend against these global international robber barons, which is what they are. So I think there is a role of regulation combined with education to explain that, you know, this stuff may look nice, but it's really bad for you, and therefore as a government we say that there are situations where we don't want this used. You know, government mandates all kinds of stuff. You know, if you want to ride a motorcycle, you have to wear a helmet. If you want to drive a car, you have to wear seatbelts. Now, not all individual citizens may like that or agree with it, but after a while, there is a very broad consensus that yes, you know, for the safety of the individual people concerned, and also for public safety, we're just going to make this mandatory. So, I have no problem with some sort of regulation when it comes to some of the most powerful technologies that we'll use. Sure.
I also think that regulation can be a way, but your question was if it's the only solution. If it is the only solution, then we're in a bad position. Because there's conflict of interest here. There's a lot of government and corporation kind of being intertwined, and that's a problem. So I don't think it's the only solution, but it could be.
From the panel or from the audience?
From my experience involved in government at various levels, I think the most critical part in any process is the political commitment. If there's no political commitment to openness, there's no actually policies. No, I'm not saying that even if you initiate policies, they are successful, but the first step is to initiate policies toward openness. And I believe regulation is one of the tools that governments, at the national level and the transnational, like the European Union, have to regulate, let's say, the role of multinationals like Google and so on. And this is, I think, the case that I believe we should all work towards, because one of the tasks, besides, I think the most critical task is building things ourselves, and this is the essence of the open source movement, and this is whenever it's successful, it's when it builds competitive products for the mass market. But the other part, which I believe is critical, it's lobbying as well. It's lobbying with local governments, national governments, transnational institutions, even at the European level or the United Nations level. I think we have to keep this in mind, and because the open source or the openness, the open movements are by default global movements, and we have to see them as such and utilize the experiences that we have all over the world, even if it's in Australia or Sweden or whenever. And I believe this is the key part of it. And for us being together here, even in small numbers, I think it's critical for these movements to come together at the physical layer as well, as we are here.
Thank you for that. I just want to say, if also we're going to tackle this problem, we have to start using the right words and the right definitions. Open doesn't mean what we think it means. I can tell you about some organizations that love open, as an open source, as an open data. Google loves open. Facebook loves open. The Conservative government in the UK loves open because it means privatization for them. Open can have two very different meanings. Open can mean open as in an open field, the commons, which doesn't have a fence around it, or open can mean open like an open door. you have to question the purpose of the door. A door exists to be shut, to be open, to be locked, possibly, right? So we should stop using, if we're going to fix this problem, open to mean free, as in freedom, to mean liberty. Because open has become so meaningless, it's been used for so many purposes, that when I hear it, I don't understand what you mean, and I probably think that you don't have the same aims as we do if we're fighting here for freedom. And I think we really have to start being careful about using those terms, because open is being used mostly today for open washing, not to defend freedoms. So I'm sorry to sound a little Richard Stallman on you right now, but I think it's about time that we learned this.
I think this is a critical issue. So, one more.
Yes, I would like to.
Okay. I'll start with the gentleman behind because it was.
Thanks. I think it's a fact that 98% of users' data are in the hands of US-based corporations like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. So we have a question here about how can Europe compete with that? What can Europe do to get into the game? One possible solution would be, as it is these days proposed on the European Commission level, to go for the open data, to go for open knowledge, and to build on the technologies that are based on open data, open knowledge, open shared knowledge, etc. Would you say that this is realistic? Can something like this bring Europe on a competitive level compared to the US corporations?
Okay, so we can take also a second question in order to have the questions answered together.
I understand the interesting in between technology development in Europe and in the EU. And I just think that about Apple, as you said before, it is more reliable, let's say, isn't it? More reliable the security system Apple offers? In a respect.
I think that's a different conversation we have about the difference between privacy and security. Google is very, very secure. Google is probably one of the most secure platforms.
Comparing to Apple?
Well, Google is very, very secure, but they keep you secure from everyone else apart from themselves. So I gave this example yesterday. It's like the mafia. The mafia will keep you secure from everyone else apart from the mafia. So we have to stop conflating security and privacy. Just because something is secure doesn't mean you have any privacy.
So are both the policies are rejected?
Sorry?
Both policies, business policies, are rejected to be implemented in Europe area.
Could you proceed to the
yeah, well, I will proceed my question. It was that Apple has 180 billion to invest nowhere. So that they do not know, they didn't decide yet where to invest this amount. So regarding the Europe's spending of 100 billion, let's think about the possibility of a private company investing in Europe developing technology.
Okay, so I don't have you to comment on these two questions. The first one was, I think, what is the perspective, what open data can do to the problems that we're discussing. But I think that as a personal remark that we should really start figuring out that open data can be open as a field, as that you have said, or can be open like opening a door. But it might be, it should be closed. So what are your comments on that?
So I think a big investment of Apple in, I don't know, something here would be a little bit like the Dutch East India Company in the 1600s building all these beautiful harbors in Indonesia. That was not for the benefit of the Indonesians, because we then proceeded to rape the entire subcontinent for 300 years and built a beautiful, expensive city in Amsterdam out there. So when I was working for IBM in the 90s, as a very young lad from a very left-wing leaning political family, my manager took me apart at some point and explained to me what it was that IBM was doing. And he asked me what it is that you think we do here. And I said, well, you know, we built these wonderful computers and we provide global network management, yada, yada, yada. I was very enthusiastic about the technology. And he said, no. So there is something you need to understand here. What it is that we do here at IBM is we make money for shareholders. The fact that we do that by selling a $100 million supercomputer to the US government is incidental. That's a detail. What we do here is make money for shareholders. That's the goal, and that's the only thing we're really interested in. And if you want to work here, you need to better get with the program. And so then after a while I left. So I would be really, really wary about being fiscally, financially, and otherwise colonized by wealthy American corporations who have become wealthy by raping the rest of the planet. Because basically you're taking yourself, you're just going to be a colony of somebody else. And it's not going to be for your benefit. Although some individuals might benefit from that process, and maybe even a significant number of individuals, the society as a whole is certainly not going to benefit from that. So I would really, really try to resist it. Interestingly, the only municipality that has successfully completely eviscerated Microsoft from its IT infrastructure, the city of Munich, was recently offered the European headquarters of Microsoft to be placed in the town of Munich, together with a significant investment package. But then, of course, they would have to revert their migration away from Microsoft technology for the municipal IT. So that's how scary big corporations are if a local government successfully walks away from them. That they are willing to offer the tens and tens and tens of millions to come back into the fold, to come back into the prison. Where, you know, you will have a beautiful prison, but it's going to be a prison.
The municipality of Munich accepted the offer of...
No, they rejected it. So when they first announced that they were going to migrate away from Microsoft, Steve Ballmer himself the next day flew in on a private jet to Munich and offered them 5 years free Microsoft licenses plus $30 million worth of education support services. And the only thing Munich had to do was to keep doing what they had been doing in the 10 years before. Just basically, you know, every year Microsoft comes by and just rapes you a little bit. And just accept it and get with the program. And so there were two courageous local politicians who just said no. And they just walked away. And now they are one of the hottest IT cities in Europe because they then proceeded to spend all their IT money on local companies instead of on a foreign company. But now that they have succeeded in this migration, Microsoft is actually trying to buy them back by putting their headquarters there, or by offering to do so.
Some comment on the issue of open data, how open data fits this picture of privacy.
So I think the open stuff is true. The word has been completely abused to the level where it's now essentially useless because it can mean anything to anyone and therefore it means nothing. I mean, the other problem, of course, with the free stuff, even the free is in freedom stuff, and even if Richard Stallman, who I just respect all the way and love dearly, but even if somebody talks about freedom in an American accent, which I also still have because I used to work in Texas for IBM, I apologize. So if somebody in an American accent talks about freedom, we immediately think about gay-hating, abortion doctors shooting people with AR-15s. And it doesn't sound very positive to most progressive Europeans. So maybe even the word freedom isn't correct anymore because also it's been abused, you know, too bad by people who, you know, go around the world blowing up birthday parties with drones. So maybe, I don't know, maybe democracy would actually be a good word. I like that. It's, you know, it's a true European invention, so maybe we should honor that a bit more.
So, okay, I would like to have also a final round of questions. I think it's very important. I'm very fond of this issue. So, the first one probably could be to target towards Alexandros because he knows much better the consumer market. And the first section of the question is whether consumers are willing to pay for security. Because you can build open source systems that are very good, or free software systems that are very good on the corporate and the price level, servers, databases. This the free software movement can do. But as Sarah has already pointed out very successfully, in order to have a consumer product that users actually use, it needs to be very polished, very fantastic UX user experience and things like that that come with a cost. They come with complexity, with software complexity, with design complexity. So you need to have some viability and some reimbursement of the efforts that you put. So firstly, are people willing to pay for security? And this is towards Alexandros. Secondly, towards all, what are the business models that need to be invented or that need to be employed in order to have consumer-facing services based on free software that are appealing and that the users are actually willing to do? Are you going to sell them in some way? Are you going to subsidize them by the government or by some funds? How are you going to do it? So Alexis, you can start and continue.
Well, my understanding is that what I see every day is that actually users are used not to pay for services, and internet has played a great role in that. So my answer would be no. I mean, and when saying users, I mean the average user or the 90% of the users. So they are used to having a free Gmail account, account, a free Dropbox account, a free whatever account, so no. And most of them know that potentially they could be monitored, but they don't care because, you know, at the end of the day, they kind of balance those two things and they say, okay, I don't have something, I'm not such an important person for the NSA or any government, and you know, I want to do my job, and so they don't pay. And this has a great impact on business models, because I've seen it with many startups also, that, you know, they start building a product for somebody who should pay for that, and not only B2C products, but also B2B products, and they switch to a kind of selling anonymized data to other businesses at the end of the day, because even small SMEs do not care about, you know, giving the data out. So that's what I see today. Perhaps the culture should change. I personally see a change of the culture on the other direction. I actually was reading an article 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, saying that millennials are not used to pay for the product. So I agree that the culture should change. I'm very fond of education, and you know, both of my parents are professors, and you know, but you know, it takes a lot of time, and it's very difficult to find business models that keep privacy and are viable. It's very difficult. And actually, as you said, Apple, Apple says actually that you pay for that, but I don't monitor. It's not what they do at the end of the day, but it makes sense.
Remember their costs.
Yes.
They're not long term. So, any comments on the business model? Aaron, maybe you'd like to discuss your own business model, how you think you already did it yesterday, but probably.
As an unofficial question. So, to respectfully slightly disagree with what you said, remember that when we're creating alternatives, we're not playing by the same game. Now, Georgia, you know this because you guys are creating a very similar alternative. So please feel free to chime in at any point. Our business model with Indie is that initially we will be selling the application. It's going to start out on the Mac platform and hopefully iOS when we can port it. It's free and open source. So anyone with technical knowledge who wants to just download it and use it can. But for a regular audience, and can we please stop calling these people users? All right. Again, there are only two industries that use the word user. One is the narcotics industry, and the other is ours. Okay, they're people. They're people who use the things that we make. They're people. So we, our target is regular people, and they will buy it off of these app stores, for example. Even if it's available for free, because the experience is seamless. Because why would you want to make it harder for yourself if you can pay a few pounds or a few dollars to get this? And then if you want encrypted backups, that'll be a yearly service fee that you can pay if you want to have an always reachable encrypted backup. You want a domain name to point to your public posts, that'll be a yearly fee. Remember, we don't need to get 100 million, 200 million people, 500 million people using this immediately, right? We're not trying to scale vertically. We're trying to scale sustainably in a horizontal manner, right? So, Georgia, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I want to add something that I was thinking. Perhaps we have a competitive advantage, and that is that we don't care about becoming filthy rich. We don't care about having millions of people using our software or making $1 million or being bought by a big corporation. We don't care about that. So that's a competitive advantage because we don't need a lot to develop and sustain our business. We're not planning on becoming huge. Maybe that gives you freedom to be creative, to do things, and maybe this will maybe this will succeed, I don't know.
This is exactly it. We have 100% competitive advantage if you think about what we're doing differently. Google has a very hard job, Facebook has a very hard job because they have two audiences that they're designing for. The people that they call their users and their actual customers who pay them money. They're trying to design for two different audiences with orthogonal needs. That's very hard to do. We have just one audience, the people that use our products, right? So we have 100% less audience to design for. That's a user experience advantage. And the fact that we haven't taken advantage of that in the free and open source world for the last 30 years is a problem. It's a very understandable problem because we've been designing for ourselves as enthusiasts, right? And we've been designing really useful things that are running the internet right now. But we haven't been designing for ourselves as regular people who want to use these products. That's what needs to change.
Just one point. Most superpowers and rising powers develop their own Linux-based operating systems, develop their own hardware based on open architectures, develop their own social networks and search engines, except here in Europe. So here in Europe we are mostly consumers, and that's something that we're going to have to think about. So,
good morning, and I want to add to Mr. Balkan that if we don't change the marketing plan, the marketing strategy, the strategy of corporations, we cannot succeed in this, can I say, organization, the new organization that we need to create. That the marketing strategy create these discussions. That he said that they have two groups, the audience and the government. If we don't change the marketing, that we need money from only from the audience, we cannot create the free privacy, security, and all these stuff. So the problem is we have to change the marketing and the education of the new corporation that we need to create. This is the problem. That marketing controls everything. We talk about maybe journalists, people, developers discuss every day for this problem. But marketing control all this. How can take money? How can I be rich? This is the problem. If we change the marketing, everything will go to the right way. This is my opinion.
Is marketing here a different term for education?
Yeah, but if we can say that Mr. Balkan says that Google take money from the government, not from the people.
Oh, they take money from corporations.
We can take money from the people and be healthy.
So, okay, I'd like to probably mention some points that somehow summarize the discussion. And I would like just to have some comments on that in order to proceed with the program. Well, one point that I have observed is that we should be talking about privacy as a human right. This should be made very clear. This should be educated. So one action is education. Another point that I have made is that we should now and forever discuss the difference and understand the difference between privacy and security. What is secure, it may not be private. So we need to understand this difference. Another thing is that in the process of educating is that Facebook or all these data mining mechanisms actually can become or can prove out to be like asbestos. It's a long-term risk for democracy, it's a long-term risk for human rights. Probably this is something that we must recognize. Another tenet of action should be regulation, but also should be giving incentives and giving actual technological solutions like Ariel and George are trying to accomplish, that are easy to use and are designed for people, not just developers or hackers. And probably one couple of last points is that Europe should have a stance on that. We as European citizens should really have an opinion on that, should really have our own opinion and our own discussion on what privacy means. And also, as the last one, is that we should finally face maybe that the open term and the open data term and things like that are having the danger of being abused by various people for various purposes. So these are just some things that I have noted here. I don't know if you have some final remarks.
I think at this point I just want to thank you for an excellent summary.
So, thanks, I'd like to thank you all. Now we can proceed with the program. There's a short break about, we're running late of course, there's a short break about 20 minutes. And there are some labs. There's a design lab by Errol, a very interesting lab. There's also a security lab by Archen. There's also another security lab with privacy cafe people over there. So I'll just to probably have a discussion where we commence the session is whether you would like to have some of these labs in parallel, especially, for example, Errol's lab and Argen's lab can be serious, but maybe some other labs, the two last labs, can be in parallel. So if you are a developer that is interested to having to working with XMPP and OTR and things like that, you can have a discussion with me. I'm running a lab. If you are a user that would like to use some security tools, you can have a discussion with the privacy cafe people, and in order to arrange the last two labs. Okay.
I would suggest that if the privacy cafe people are happy with it, I'm willing to combine whatever I want to do with them, so to fold that into one.
I think that it would be perfect, actually.
I would be happy with that, and if they're happy with it as well. I think we are talking about a lot of the same things and the same tools, if I'm not entirely mistaken.
Okay, so now we can have